with employee grievances that oftentimes it's a leadership issue. It is one where I could look back in the career that I had prior to this one. I could look back at individuals who, wherever they went in the organization, we'd see a bump in the number of grievances. And that just seemed to be a trend that followed with them. And I think a lot of that had to do with leadership skills and interpersonal skills and how they dealt with, in this instance, employees. Can I ask you, Mr. Lick, in terms of how much of it is an issue related to culture and leadership as it relates to the ballooning number of grievances that we've seen? Conversely, then, how much is it related to the cultural change that we want to see within the organization?
I think there's likely a whole range of reasons why people put in grievances or complaints in our case. And, I think, yes, absolutely, some of it has to do with leadership, but the ability to resolve conflict in a workplace. That doesn't always mean that it's leadership. Sometimes it's with your colleague and so on. So absolutely, the ability to deal effectively with interpersonal relations, that is absolutely a skill and a lack of skill that actually results in complaints and grievances. But I would say that the department is putting in place some means of helping people deal with that through the CCMS group, which helps individuals deal with conflict in the workplace. Mm-hmm. A great initiative. In fact, we refer people back and forth between our group and theirs, depending on who's best able to handle a particular complaint. The informal conflict resolution process that you spoke about, I think, is new in terms for the CAF at this point in time in the grievance process. I think we're optimistic that it will provide another opportunity to resolve a complaint or a conflict before getting into the long process of a grievance. So we're optimistic, and I think it will be a positive thing. We just don't see all the results just yet because it is so new.
Right. Follow up on that is you talked about the mandatory timelines and the benefits that come with that as it relates to resolving grievances and complaints. And I know that, again, dealing with unionized employees, the big issue there is it becomes a morale issue, right? The longer it festers and boils, it can also lead to other grievances. Can you speak to some of the morale issues that have come about as a result of some of the investigations that you've undertaken in your office in terms of their impact on, yeah?
So I think, as I said, we're very effective at getting resolution for people that come to us. But we can only really help people resolve an issue if they do come to us, other than through some of the systemic investigations we do. But on an individual basis, though, yes, we're very successful. But we always say to people, as I think I mentioned earlier, if you can come to us earlier, we may be able to help you earlier, whether that's with information or helping you deal with a particular issue. Sometimes it's a simple phone call to somebody we know in our great network of contacts. But the idea but some people sometimes leave it to the last minute to come to us, and that's usually not that helpful. We can still help them, hopefully, but we say to people, yes, we're the office of last resort, but we're also that office of first resort too as well that helps people deal with an issue, hopefully before it becomes an issue in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Before I turn over the 2.5 minutes to Ms. Normandina, taking note that all of the noise in this room seems to come from one location. I've yet quite to determine it, but I got an idea. So I might mention that the next time the noise level hits. So respect for colleagues, please. 2.5 minutes, Madame Normandine.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lick, in the documents we received from you, something drew my attention. The fact that in the UK, the Ombudsman can not only make recommendations, but in some cases, they are binding. So I'd like to hear if you have any information on the kinds of recommendations could be binding there, if that's something that could apply to you. And to get back to Mr. Joshi, as to whether that might be conceivable within MGIRC to have these types of binding recommendations.
So yes, the UK Ombudsman, the Service Complaints Ombudsman there, it does have the ability to, in essence, enforce certain recommendations. Not all, but certain recommendations. That is one way of doing it. I think we've proven ourselves, and with the CAF in particular, that we were able to do that without that type of enforcement. So I'm kind of I'm kind of neutral as to whether that would be beneficial or not. I think the idea, usually with most ombudspersons around the world, there is no enforcement power generally. And that's because of the way that ombudsmen work through moral suasion. Do the right thing with the evidence of our investigation. And like I said, generally we find with individual complaints that works quite well for us. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary. There may be a situation in the future that it may be nice to have, but I would say that it's not absolutely necessary with the situation that we're currently in. At the same time, that situation could change with different leadership and so on. So I'm kind of neutral on that in that way.
Peut-être Monsieur.
Mr. Joshi?
Possible? Yes, it is possible. Mr. Fish made 2 recommendations in that regard, that if the final authority does not make a decision in 90 days after receiving the file from us, our findings and recommendations would be binding on the Canadian Forces. And the second scenario, he called for a working group to look at whether the final authority powers should be directed somewhere else, somewhere like the committee. I would just caution that it's not as easy as it may seem, because the authority set must follow, that if we are giving decisions with a financial implication or putting people in certain positions, the authority set must be there, but it is certainly something that could be investigated, and Mr. Justice Fish in his 3rd IRA report did make those recommendations.
Thank you, Madame Normandine. 2.5 minutes, Ms. Madsen.
Yeah, I think to build off of Madame Normandine's questions, I mean, I spoke to, when the minister was here at committee, and I asked directly whether those pieces of independence, especially around the ombudsperson and their office, that I was calling for in legislation, my bill C-362, if that would be made within the changes that he has indicated he will be making. Unfortunately, he said that they were not. So I'd love your comments on that. But Mr. Joshi as well, I mean, you talked and referenced that independence of, and the importance of the independence in your office, and the changes that Justice Fish and Justice Arbour were asking for as well. Do you believe that those will come forward in future legislative changes? Have you heard anything? How important are both of those for both of your offices?
So I'll start first, if I may. Yeah, certainly the minister has not consulted with me on that particular legislation, so it's kind of hard to say what exactly it is, though I have some knowledge maybe of perhaps what it could be. But certainly he has not consulted with me on that, on the issue of independence of our office. You know, that I think is unfortunate in the sense that I think it's appropriate that I put a case forward and he can decide what to do with it, obviously. Obviously, you know my opinion on whether and all my predecessors' opinion on whether we should be legislated or not. But at the same time, I think ultimately it is a choice of Parliament as to whether this happens or not. And I think the best opportunity is going forward with legislation, absolutely.
Mr. Joshi?
With the grievance system, we know that the Canadian Armed Forces is making internal adjustments to their system. We've been briefed on some of the amendments to the system, but there has been no discussion on their part, with us at least, of looking at those 2 critical fish recommendations.
Thank you.
You've got 30 seconds, but
That's fine.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both witnesses, or all 3 witnesses, for being here today. Mr. Lick, can you just remind me, did your predecessor, Gary Walburn, actually propose legislation, enabling legislation to make the office of the Ombudsman independent and as a office of Parliament?
Yes, in the document that we'll table with the committee, yes, it does have draft legislation in there for the independence of the office through legislation.
Okay, and that would then, if you're looking at making sure that you are truly independent, and when we look at a historical case here, and going on Mr. Collins' line of lack of leadership, we know that with the sexual misconduct case against former Chief of Defence Staff John Vance, that documents by your predecessor was given to the Minister of National Defence at the time, Minister Sagen, who refused to handle that documentation. As an independent office, how would that situation have been handled?
Well, I'd say it would be difficult to understand how it would be handled without having all the details in it. If it was a criminal matter, we would still be prevented from, we would make sure it gets to the right place to be able to deal with that, whether that's with the military police or whatever. With that particular instance, while I don't have all the details, obviously, I think it's a matter we can put in legislation how would I escalate it? Would I escalate it to the Prime Minister beyond the Minister if I'm not getting action on it? Would I escalate it to this committee? There's a variety of ways that we could do it for the different situations that we might encounter. My point is that it should be escalated to someone who can take action on it that is apolitical or not political.
But at least you'd be able to get action on it.
Yes.
And you wouldn't have the cover-up that we witnessed under the previous Minister of Defense. I appreciate that. Now, when we start looking at your budget, and you're saying there's cuts coming, those are a unilateral decision that's being made by the Minister of National Defense that you don't even have any input in saying this is what our budget is, this is what our needs are. They're just going to give you the budget and you have to make do with what you get?
Yeah, certainly they've proposed cuts on our organization. We do have the ability through the business planning process to say what the impact would be and type of thing. But generally those cuts, the decision on those cuts at the very end is not mine. The decision is the department's. So you're saying it's going to impact on your travel, being able to go across the bases, meet with members of National Defense, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and you also said contracts. The contracts you're talking about would be having those types of specialized inspectors or investigators? It could be, yes, if it's a contract for generally a contract for professional services. So that could be hiring, as we have done, a team or an organization that would help with research, as we do right now. It could be something as simple as IT support. It could be a variety of things. It doesn't really matter. One of the things that we will likely have problems going forward is our IT system, and we don't have the experience in house to be able to do that.
So you're done July 2nd. Do you know whether or not there's been anyone appointed or somebody is in the works of being vetted to replace you as ombudsman?
No, we do not.
And we have a similar problem over at MGIRC that you don't have a permanent chair or a vice chair at this time, and no indication that anyone is being appointed to fill in?
Vice chair was appointed last week. We got notice of the OIC last week with a start date in April. With respect to a permanent chair, we understand that it's in the works, could expect something very soon, but I do not have a date for that.
So foot dragging on appointments are impacting upon the ability to get work done, and who knows what's going to happen going forward on the Ombudsman's office if they don't extend your contract. So let's talk about the CDS referring cases over to the Military Grievance Committee. Does the CDS just cherry pick these, or is it escalated by some other means?
So for the mandatory grievances, no choice in the matter. If it fits into a subject category, mandatorily comes over to us. For discretionary files, we have no visibility on the criteria that are being used. Up until very recently, we received almost all discretionary files, but as of last year, the number of discretionary files we receive has gone down significantly.
Okay. You know, you say it takes 16 months to do one of your reviews and to report back to the CDS. ATIP takes, by law, is 45 days. If ATIPs were actually handled in a transparent manner and getting back from the Department of National Defense, Canadian Forces, to the members or to those that are asking this, for this information, whether it's privacy or just extra information, would there be as big a backlog facing your committee in dealing with those grievances?
So the ATIP does not affect us at all. We come outside of it, but if a time limit was put in place, absolutely it would have an impact for getting back the information. Absolutely would have an impact.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Mr. Fillmore, final 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for your work and for your time today. I want to switch gears a little bit. There are many facets to the question that the committee is studying. The facet of it that I'm interested in is the information, the data, and how it moves and how it's accessed. There was a 2020 paper by the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada that talked about options for establishing a declassification strategy for documents to do with national security and intelligence records. And my question to whomever would like to think about it with us is, would an automatic declassification regime be beneficial in the work of in your work as it pertains to DND and CAF records?
I think for my purpose, we very rarely deal in classified information. Most of the information we deal with is protected B type of thing. So, you know, that particular issue of having a way of